the morning of September 19, 2004, a grazing leaseholder named Ronald Petrie, then 58 years old, recorded 11 seconds of footage on a trail camera mounted on a lodgepole pine on a forestry land west of Rocky Mountain House, Alberta. He never posted it. He never sold it. But by the end of that same week, the file was gone, deleted, in front of a witness. And the only reason any account of it exists at all is that the witness, a fish and wildlife officer named Garrett Voss, 61, told Petrie things across the following 2 months that Petrie wrote down after the officer's funeral. And these are some of the most interesting Bigfoot details I've ever heard.
Voss died in the spring of 2019. Petrie kept the notebook for another 2 years before he showed it to anyone. He was clear about what he had and what he did not have. He did not have the footage. He did not have proof. What he had was the memory of what he saw on the camera and a record of what a man who had worked that country for 31 years told him about the animal in the frame. These are the pages from that notebook in Petrie's own telling. I want to say at the start that I'm not a man who goes looking for this. I ran cows on a lease out past the forestry boundary for most of my life, and I put trail cameras on the land the way other men keep a dog to know what was moving through. Bears mostly, elk in the fall, a cougar twice in 20 years. I checked the cards on a schedule, and I did not expect the schedule to ever hand me anything I could not explain because it never had. The camera on the lodgepole was one I almost did not put out that year. It covered a game trail that ran down off a bench toward a spring, the kind of trail everything used, and I had good pictures off it going back a decade. In the second week of September, I pulled the card and ran through it at the kitchen table the way I always did, thumbing past deer and past a sow with 2 cubs. And then there was a frame that stopped my hand. I thought it was a man. That was my first thought, and I held onto it for maybe a full second because the shape filled the frame the way a person would if they walked right up and looked into the lens. Then the second thought came, which was that no man was that big, and the third thought came, which was that no man had a face like that. And after the third thought, I did not have any more thoughts for a while. I just looked at it. It was old. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Whatever it was old the way a very old horse is old, or a very old dog, where the age is in the way the weight hangs and in the gray that has come up through everything that used to be dark. There was gray through the beard of it, and gray across the shoulders, and the face was lined and heavy and tired. The eyes threw the flashback flat and bright. It was looking straight into the camera. It was not moving. It had come down that game trail, and it had stopped, and it had put its face close to the lens on purpose, and then, in the next frames, it was gone. And that was the 11 seconds. I sat at that table until the coffee went cold. Then I did the only thing that made sense to me, which was to take it to the one man I knew who spent more time in that country than I did. Garrett Voss had been the officer for that district longer than I had held the lease. I had dealt with him over the years the way you deal with the government when you run cattle on Crown land, which is to say we were not friends, but we had a long acquaintance. And I trusted him the way you trust a man who has never once lied to you, even when the truth cost you money. He was a big, quiet man who had gotten quieter as he aged. I called him and I said I had something on a card I wanted him to look at, and I did not say what. And something in how I said it made him come out the same day. I remember him standing at my kitchen table with his hat in his hand, looking down at the laptop. And I remember that he did not react the way I expected. I expected him to laugh, or to tell me it was a costume, or to get that careful official look men like him get when they are about to tell you that you're mistaken. He did none of that. He looked at the screen for a long time, and his face did a thing I had never seen it do, which was go still and pale at the same time. And then he said very quietly that he knew that one. I asked him what he meant, that he knew it. He did not answer right away. He asked me first where the camera was exactly, and I told him. And he nodded like the location confirmed something he already believed. Then he told me to sit down, and he sat down across from me, and he told me to delete it before he explained anything else. He said it plain, take it off the card, take it off the computer, take it off anywhere it lives, and then we will talk. I told him I was not going to do that. He said then we would not talk, and he started to get up, so I deleted it. I want to be honest that I did not want to, and that I have regretted it every day since. But Garrett Voss was not a man who bluffed, and I could see that he meant it, that he would walk out of my house and I would never learn what he knew. I dragged the file to the trash, and I emptied the trash, and I turned the laptop around so he could see the folder was empty, and he watched me do all of it, and only when it was gone did he let his shoulders come down. Then he told me about the animal, and he kept telling me in pieces over the rest of that fall. The first thing he said was that he had known that particular one for the better part of 20 years, and that I had done something that no one else had managed to do, which was get it to walk up to a camera and look into it. He said that was wrong. He said it exactly like that it was wrong, and he meant that it was out of character, that it broke a pattern he had watched hold for 2 decades. Because the thing about this one, he said, the thing that had let it get so old was that it did not let itself be seen. Everywhere else in that country, every other camera, every other close call, this animal had given the lens a wide berth. He had photographs, not of it, but of the evidence of it deliberately avoiding it. Trails that bent away from a camera set, a set that had been walked around in a half circle you could read in the mud. He said he had once watched, through glasses from a long way off, this animal come to the edge of a meadow, look directly at a camera he had placed there, and turn its back and go around. It knew what the cameras were. It had known for a long time. It had spent its whole long life not being photographed, which was the reason it had a whole long life, and now it had walked up to mine and stood still for the flash. And that told him something had changed. He would not say that night what he thought had changed. He said he needed to go up and look at some things first. But before he left, he told me the first of his own stories, and I think he told it to make me understand what kind of animal we were talking about, because up until then, I only had 11 seconds of a tired old face, and I did not understand anything. He told me about a calf. Years back, early in his time in that district, he had gotten a call from a rancher about a dead calf, and he had gone out expecting a bear, because it is always a bear. But the calf was wrong. He would not give me all the details, and I did not push, but he said the way the animal had been opened was wrong, too neat and too deliberate, and the way it had been moved was wrong, dragged and then set down in a place that was hidden on purpose, tucked under a deadfall where nothing would find it by accident. A bear caches a kill by raking dirt and branches over it. This was not that. This was something that had picked the calf up and carried it to a specific spot it had chosen, because the spot was good, and that had understood that a hidden thing stays yours. He said that was the first time in his career he understood that there was something in that country that thought about what it did before it did it. He filed the calf as predation. He said he filed a great many things as predation over the years. That was the first story. He never once, in telling it, called the thing an animal in the ordinary sense. He called it a Sasquatch, flatly, the way you would name a species you had studied. And he was annoyed with me the one time I hedged and said the thing or it, because he said a man who has watched a Bigfoot for 20 years owes it the courtesy of the word, So I will use the word the way he used it because he earned it and I only borrowed it. There were others. The second one he told me a week or so later when he came back down out of the country looking like he had not slept. He told me about being watched. He said any man who spends enough time up there gets the feeling of being watched, and mostly it is nothing. It is the mind making shapes. But there is a different version of the feeling that is not nothing, and he had learned the difference the hard way. He described a camp he had made one autumn on a survey, a simple thing, a tent and a fire and a line strung between two trees with his food bag on it. He said he woke in the night to that feeling, the real version, and he lay still and listened and heard nothing at all, which was itself the wrong thing because a night in that country is never fully silent, and this one was. In the morning, he found that something had come into his camp. Nothing was taken, but the food bag had been moved, taken down off the line and set on the ground and left there, unopened, as if something had lifted it down to look at it and decided against it. And the line he had strung, the trip line at the edge of camp that he kept low to the ground to catch his own boot in the dark, had not been broken. Whatever came in had stepped over it. He measured the way a man like him measures. To step over that line without touching it and still reach the food bag, a thing would have to have known the line was there, seen it in the dark, and chosen to lift its foot. He said an animal does not do that. An animal blunders into a line or avoids the whole area. It does not thread the needle. It does not study your camp and take nothing and leave you a sign, whether it meant the sign or not, that it had been there and understood what it was looking at. He told me one more thing about that camp, almost as an afterthought, and it was the detail that stayed with me longest. On the ground near where the food bag had been set down, in the soft dirt at the edge of the ash, there was a mark he could not account for. Not a track, though there were tracks, and he measured those too. This was a place where something had crouched and pressed a stick or a bone into the dirt, over and over in a small, tight pattern, the way a man will worry at the ground with a twig while he is thinking about something. He said it looked for all the world like a thing had sat at the edge of his dead fire in the dark and fidgeted while it studied his sleeping shape, and that the picture of that, a Sasquatch sitting patient in the cold turning a stick in the dirt while it decided what to make of the man in the tent, was worse to him than any track could have been, because a track only tells you a thing was there. That told him a thing had thought about him. I asked him if he was afraid that night. He said no. He said the being watched part is not the part to be afraid of. The part to be afraid of is when it stops watching and decides. The third story was the one that changed how I heard all the others, and he told it to me last in November when the snow had come and he knew he was telling me the whole shape of the thing. He told me about a man, a hunter years back, who had gotten too close to it. Voss would not name him. He said the man had come across the animal in the open, in daylight, at a distance where a rifle made him feel safe. And instead of backing away, the man had done the thing that men with rifles do, which is push closer to get a better look, closer than any sense should have let him get. And the animal, which had spent its life avoiding exactly this, had turned and made itself understood. Voss said there was no attack. There did not need to be. There was a bluff, a movement forward that closed half the distance in a breath and stopped, and there was a sound. And there was, at the end of it, a rock. He said the animal picked up a rock and threw it, and it was not a panic throw, it was aimed. And it hit near enough to the man that the man understood he had been allowed to leave. The hunter came out of the country and did not go back. And Voss said the lesson of it, the lesson he had spent 30 years learning, was that this was not a gentle thing. People want it to be gentle. People see the tired old face and they want it to be a kind old grandfather of the forest. but it was not gentle, it was patient. And an old animal that is patient and no longer afraid of you is the most dangerous kind, because its distance from you is not fear anymore. It stopped keeping its distance out of fear a long time ago. It keeps its distance out of choice, and a thing that keeps its distance out of choice can choose, anytime it wants, to stop. There was a fourth story, shorter than the others, that he told me the same night as the hunter and the rock, and it was the one that made the hair stand up on the back of my own neck at the kitchen table. He said that one winter he had been staying alone at a cabin the district kept, snowed in, and for 3 nights running he had heard, out past the woodpile, a sound like a person calling a dog. 2 notes, a low one and a high one, the exact tune a man whistles when he wants his dog to come in out of the cold, over and over, patient, from a little different place in the dark each night. The first night he had actually gone to the window and looked because part of him believed there was a man out there, lost, in trouble. There was no man, there was no dog, there was no other cabin and no road and 40 miles of snow in every direction. And on the 3rd night, when the whistling came, he understood that it was not calling a dog, it was calling him. It had heard him at some point whistle for something, or it had simply learned the sound the way it learned the elk, and it had worked out that the sound brings the man to the window, and it was standing out in the dark making the sound to see if the man would come out. He did not go out. He said that was the closest he ever came to going out, that first night, and that the thing that stopped him on the 2nd and 3rd was knowing that whatever was making the sound wanted, very badly and very patiently, for him to open the door. He told me the behaviors he had cataloged, the way you would tell a man the habits of a bear so the man would not get himself killed. It moved in weather, he said, in wind and rain because the weather covered its sound. It used the same trails as the elk and moved when they moved. It could make sounds that were not its own. He had heard it answer an elk bugle with a bugle that was almost right and wrong in a way that raised the hair on his arms. And once, near a cabin, he had heard it make a sound like a person calling a dog. 2 notes, the exact cadence of a man whistling his dog in from the yard. And there had been no man and no dog for 40 miles. It read intent, he said. That was the thing he came back to. It read what was in you. A calm man it watched. An aggressive man it left, or it warned. It knew the difference between a person who meant it harm and a person who did not, and it responded to the difference. And Voss said he did not know any wild animal that did that. That truly did that. And he had stopped trying to fit it into the category of animal a long time ago. There was one more thing he told me, and he told it to me differently than the others, slower, like it cost him something. He said that not everything he had seen of it over the years was a warning, and that this was the part he had never been able to square with the hunter and the rock and the calf under the deadfall. He said that back in the middle of his career, a kid had gone missing off a trail in that country, a boy of 9 or 10 who had wandered off a family campsite, and the search had gone on 2 days into cold nights, and everyone who knew the country knew what 2 cold nights meant for a child that small. On the 2nd morning, the boy walked out on his own, down a drainage, half a mile from where anyone had been looking, cold and scared but whole. And the thing the boy said that got written off as a scared child making up a friend was that a big hairy man had stayed with him in the night and kept him warm and walked him to the water, and in the morning pointed him down the hill toward the sound of the searchers and would not come any further. Voss said he had stood at the edge of that and looked down at the boy's tracks, and next to them, pressed into the same mud, the other tracks, the big ones, walking alongside the small ones the whole way down, and then stopping, exactly stopping, at the last bend before the open ground where the searchers were, and turning back. He never wrote that in a report either. He said he had carried that story and the story of the hunter and the rock side by side for 30 years, and never been able to make them be about two different animals because the tracks said they were the same one, and that the only thing he had ever landed on was that it was not gentle and it was not cruel. It was something that decided, case by case, what a person was, and acted on what it decided, and that a 9-year-old lost boy and a grown man pushing in with a rifle got two very different animals because they were two very different things to be, and that this, more than anything else in 20 years, was what convinced him he was not dealing with an animal at all. And then he told me why it had walked up to my camera, which was the thing I had wanted to know since September. He said the animal was dying. He had been up in the country all fall looking, and he had found the sign of it. And he had put it together with the 20 years he already carried, and he was as sure as he could be about anything. It was old past the age these things get to be, and it was alone. There had been others once, he said, not many. This had never been rich country for them, but there had been a few he had known the sign of, and one by one over the years, that sign had stopped appearing, and for a long time now there had been only this one. It was the last of the ones he knew, and it had come back that fall to a particular drainage, the one my camera sat above, and Voss said it had come back there because that was its ground. He believed it had been born in that drainage, or that its people had denned there, or that its dead were there. He could not prove which, but he had seen it return to that specific place before, across the years, the way an old man returns to the house he grew up in, and he believed it had come back this last time to die where it started. And that, he said, was why it walked up to my camera and stood still, not to threaten me, not to ask me for anything. It walked up and looked into the lens because it had spent its entire life not being seen, and it did not care anymore. The thing that had kept it hidden, the caution, the fear, the long discipline of never once being caught, had let go. It was near the end, and it had stopped keeping its own secret. My camera had just happened to be on the trail it was walking, and it had looked into the flat glass eye of it the way a dying man might finally look at a thing he had spent his life avoiding, without fear, because there was nothing left to protect. I asked him then why I had to delete it. If it was the last one, if it was dying anyway, why did 11 seconds matter? He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me the part I think he had been carrying the whole time. He said that a confirmed one, a filmed one, a clear face that no one could argue with, was the one thing the country could not survive. Not the animal, the paperwork. He said if that footage got out and got proven, and it would have gotten proven, a face like that leaves no room for argument, then every lease and every cut block and every road in that valley would freeze under study while the government decided what it was obligated to do about a thing it had spent decades pretending was a story. The grazing would go. The forestry would go. And worse, he said, if the animal died where he thought it was going to die, and someone found the body because a video had told them where to look, then there would be a specimen, and a specimen changes everything. And no agency he had ever worked for wanted to be the one holding that. He had watched them bury smaller things than this to avoid smaller fights than that. He said the easiest thing for everyone, the thing that kept the valley the way it was and kept a lot of families in work, was for the last of them to die the way it had lived, unfilmed, unfound, unproven, a story and nothing more. But that was not the whole of why he made me delete it, and he told me the rest of it plain because by then he had decided to be plain with me about everything. He said he did not want me tangled in it. He said an old animal that has just walked up to a camera on my land, on a trail above a drainage it means to die in, is not a thing I want to be the discoverer of. He said the worst thing I could do was make that place, that camera, that man, into a point of interest for the government or for the people who would come with their own cameras if the footage got out, and he did not want any of them tramping through the last of that animal's ground while it was trying to end. And he did not want it in its last strange, fearless weeks, learning to associate my camera and my lease with attention, with people. Because he had spent 30 years watching what happens when these things stop keeping their distance. And he did not want me to be the man who taught the oldest one he knew that the distance was not worth keeping anymore. Take it down, he said. Stay off that drainage until it is over. Do not be the one who found it. So I did what he said. I did not go up into that country the rest of that fall. I left the camera where it was, and I did not check it. I told myself I would understand the whole of it in the spring. Garrett Voss went up into that drainage 3 times that fall on his own time, checking. He would not take me. After the first snow, he came down and sat at my table and told me in fewer words than any story before it that he had found where it went. He said there was a place, a bed of ground pressed flat under an overhang of rock at the head of the drainage, out of the wind, and that the animal had made it there and had been there a while, and that it was not there anymore. He would not tell me what he found in the bed. When I asked him if it was dead, he looked at me and did not answer, and then he said only that it was where it wanted to be, and that it was finished, and that I should let it be finished. And I understood from his face that there was more he had seen up there, and that he was never going to say it, and I did not ask him again. He took whatever it was he found, or he covered it, or he left it. I do not know which. He was the last man in that country who knew where it was, and he took the location to his grave. And when he died in the spring of 2019, I became the only man alive who knew any of it at all, and I did not have so much as a single frame to show for it. Fish and Wildlife has no record of the calf. There's no report on file for the camp on the survey or the hunter and the rock, and I have looked. Voss filed all of it across 31 years as predation, as bear, as nothing. The drainage above my old lease is still there. The lease is not mine anymore. I let it go the year Voss died because I could not go up into that country after that without thinking about the bed of flat ground under the rock and what he would not tell me was in it. I have thought a great deal about the fact that the last thing that animal did, or near to the last, was walk up to a camera on my land and look into it. Voss said it did that because it had stopped being afraid, because it was dying, because it no longer cared about being seen. I believe him. He knew it for 20 years and I knew it for 11 seconds. But there is a part of me that has never been able to shake the other reading of it, the one Voss would never have allowed himself, which is that a thing that's smart, that read intent, that knew the difference between a man who meant it harm and a man who did not, might have walked up to my camera at the very end, not because it had stopped caring who saw it, but because it had decided, after a long life of hiding, to let exactly one of us see it clearly one time before it was gone, and that it chose the camera of a man who would never have done it any harm. I deleted it. That is the part I cannot take back. The oldest one, the last one, walked up out of the dark and gave me its face, and a good man told me to erase it, and I did. And now the good man is dead, and the animal is gone, and all that is left is this, which is a story, which is exactly what everyone always wanted it to be. Real or fake, you decide.
What I'm about to tell you comes from a close friend of mine. I will not name her, but she did a bad thing, and her partner wanted to end her for it. But an unlikely savior came to her rescue while that man was unraveling his terrifying plan. This is her story of how she was saved by a Sasquatch.
I need to say 2 things before I say anything else, because if I do not say them both at once, then I will only ever say the easy one. The first is that I did a bad thing to a man who loved me, and I have never once pretended it was anything else. The second is that the thing that kept me alive when that same man tried to kill me for it was a Bigfoot, and I have never told anyone that until now. I'm telling it now because Trevor Lund died in February. I saw it in a notice online, a short thing, his name and 2 dates, and a town in Alberta, and no cause given, and when I read it, I felt something let go in my chest that I had been holding for a very long time. As long as he was alive, I was afraid, not that he would come for me again, he was not that kind of coward twice, but that the truth of him would die with him, and mine would be the only version left, and no one would ever be able to check it. Now he is gone, and I find I do not want the whole thing to go with him. So I'm going to tell it the way it happened in the fall of 1996 when I was 29 years old, in the mountains west of a forestry road in the interior of British Columbia. And I'm going to tell it in order, and I'm not going to make myself look better than I was. In 1996, I was living with Trevor in a rented place outside a small town, and I had been with him a little over 3 years. I worked at a clinic doing reception and billing. He worked seasonal, heavy equipment, gone weeks at a stretch, and I know now that the gone weeks were part of it, part of how a thing like that starts. But I want to be careful not to use the loneliness as an excuse, because plenty of lonely people do not do what I did. I met a man through work. It went on longer than a mistake and shorter than a life, 4 months, and the whole time I told myself I would end it, and the whole time I did not. And I'm not going to describe it more than that because the details are not the point, and the man is not the point. The point is that I was living 2 lives and I knew it was wrong and I kept doing it. And that is a thing about myself I have had a long time to sit with. Trevor found out the way people find out now, through a phone. He came home early off a job and I was in the shower and my phone lit up on the nightstand and he read it. And by the time I came out, he was sitting on the edge of the bed with my phone in his hand, and a look on his face I had never seen before and did not understand yet. Here's the thing I got wrong, the thing that nearly killed me. I expected him to yell, I expected a fight, doors, the neighbors hearing, my things on the lawn. That is what I braced for. What I got instead was a man who went very quiet and very calm and very kind. And I let myself believe the calm was forgiveness. I have learned since that the calm was the most dangerous thing in that house. He did not yell that night or any night after. He asked me questions in a low, even voice. How long and where? And did I love him, meaning the other man? And I answered all of it because I thought honesty was the road back. And he took it all in and nodded and said we would work through it. For 3 weeks, he was gentle. He cooked. He touched my shoulder when he passed me. I thought I was being given a mercy I did not deserve, and I was so grateful for it that I did not notice that a gentle man does not usually go still like that, does not usually smooth over a thing that big without a single crack showing. I thought I had gotten lucky. I had not gotten lucky. He had made a decision, and a man who has made that kind of decision has no reason to fight with you anymore. The trip was his idea. He framed it as the 2 of us getting away to put it behind us properly, just us, no phones, up into the country he knew from work, a few days at a spot he had found on a forestry road a long way from anything. He said he wanted to remember why we were us before all this. And I wanted so badly to be forgiven that I said yes to a plan that any careful person would have seen through, because the plan was that I would go with him, alone, up a road no one else used, to a place no one knew. And I told no one where we were going because it was supposed to be about the 2 of us, and telling people felt like it would break the spell of being forgiven. I packed a bag. I got in his truck. I want you to understand that I walked into it on my own 2 feet. and that I walked into it because of what I had done. The affair was the door. My guilt was the hand that opened it. We drove most of a day. The forestry road went on for hours past the last of anything, climbing, the timber closing in, and by late afternoon we were somewhere I could not have found my way back from if I had tried. And I remember that the further we went, the quieter he got. And I remember telling myself the quiet was him relaxing, letting the trip do its work. We made a camp near the end of the road where a creek came down. He was easy that evening, easier than he had been in weeks, and we sat by the fire and he talked about when we first met, and I let myself cry a little because I thought we were healing. And he watched me cry across the fire with an expression I could not read then, and can read perfectly now. It was the next morning that I understood. He wanted to hike up to a lake he said was above the camp. We went up through the timber and it was steep and there was no trail just the way he chose. And it kept getting steeper and rougher until we were on a slope above a long drop where the creek fell away into a gorge, loose rock underfoot, nothing to hold. And he stopped ahead of me at a place where the slope narrowed, and he turned around and he looked at me, and there was nothing in his face at all. Not anger, not grief, nothing. And he said my name, just my name, in that same calm voice from the last 3 weeks. And something in the emptiness of it made every animal part of me come awake at once. And I understood, all in a rush, that there was no lake, that there had never been a lake, that no one knew where I was, that he had planned this in the 3 weeks I mistook for mercy, and that when I did not come home, he would drive out and report that we had gone hiking and I had slipped on the rock above the gorge, and that everyone would believe him because it was exactly the kind of thing that happens, and because he would be so calm and so sad, and because I had given him, with my own confession, the reason a jury would understand. I will not describe the next part closely because I have found that I cannot, even now, and because it was fast. He came at me on that slope, and I went off the edge of the trail he had chosen, but not the way he meant, not down into the gorge. I went sideways and down into the timber, falling more than running, and the falling is what saved me because it took me somewhere he could not simply reach out and finish. And by the time I stopped moving, I was hurt, my ankle and my ribs and a long tear down my arm, and I was below him and out of his sight in the trees. And I could hear him coming down after me, calling my name in that voice, and I did the only thing left, which was to go, hurt and bleeding, and with no idea where, deeper into a country I did not know, away from the sound of the man who needed me dead. I ran until I could not, and then I moved as quietly as I could, and the light started to go. And somewhere in there, I understood the second horror on top of the first, which was that even if I got away from Trevor, I was alone and injured and lost in the mountains with no food and no way to make fire, and the cold already coming down out of the peaks, and that the wilderness would finish what he started if he did not find me first. I was 29 years old, and I had a torn arm and a bad ankle, and I was going to die out there one way or the other, and the last clear thought I had before the fear took over completely was that I deserved it, that this was the shape my life had bent into because of what I had done. And I sat down against a tree in the failing light, and I think I gave up. That is when it found me. I heard it before I saw it, and what I heard was wrong because it was not the sound of a man crashing down a slope, which was the sound I was braced for. It was almost no sound at all. It was the sound of something very large moving through timber the way a small thing moves, carefully without breaking anything, and it was close before I knew it was there. I looked up, and there was a shape in the last of the light standing between 2 trees, perhaps 30 feet from me, and it was enormous, taller than any man by feet, and my mind did the only thing it could do with that, which was decide it was Trevor, that he had gotten ahead of me somehow, and I made a sound and tried to get up, and my ankle would not let me. Then it moved into what light was left, and it was not Trevor, and it was not a bear, and there was a long moment where my mind simply refused all of it. And then some older part of me took over and understood what I was looking at, and understood, more importantly, that it was not coming at me. It had stopped. A bear does not stop like that. A man does not stop like that. It stood there and it looked at me and I looked at it, and I was too exhausted and too hurt to be as afraid as I should have been. And what I remember thinking in the middle of everything was that it was looking at me the way you look at something you are trying to understand, not the way you look at something you're going to eat. It was over 7 feet. I know that now from having stood so close to it later. It was more like a very old and very heavy man than like an ape, with a broad flat face and no muzzle to speak of. A heavy, bony ridge over the eyes and a wide, flat nose. Its hair a dark rust brown going to charcoal down its arms and back. Its skin, where I could see it, a weathered gray-brown. And its eyes caught what light there was and threw it back flat. There was a torn notch in its left ear. I am telling you these things calmly now because I have had years to make them calm. That night they arrived in me all at once and without order, and the only thing that came through clear was that it had chosen to stop, that it was keeping a distance on purpose, and that the distance was a kindness. I did not sleep that first night so much as pass in and out. And every time I came back, the shape was there, not close, but there, between me and the open dark. And at some point in the worst of the cold, I understood that it had moved nearer, not to me, but around me, so that the bulk of it was between me and the wind coming down off the slope. And I was, if not warm, then less cold than I had been. And I stopped being able to tell whether I was grateful to it or afraid of it or both. And I think from that night on, it was always both. I was with it for 4 days. I know it was 4 days because I counted the dawns. And the counting was one of the only things that kept me sane. I want to tell it in the pieces I remember because that is how I have it, in pieces, and because I do not want to smooth it into something neater than it was. On the first morning, it did not let me go the way I wanted to go. I woke and I could hear water somewhere below, and I started to make my way toward it, down a draw, and the thing moved to put itself in front of me and made a low sound, not a threat, a stopping sound. And when I tried to go around it, it moved again, and I understood slowly that it did not want me going down that draw. Later, much later, when I could think again, I understood why, because the draw ended in a cliff band you could not see until you were on top of it. And I had been walking, in my state, straight toward a drop. It knew the country. It steered me. That was the first time I let myself believe it was keeping me alive on purpose, and not just tolerating me. It brought me to water. This is the plainest way I can say it. On that first day after it turned me back from the draw, it led me, staying always ahead and to the side, never letting me close the distance between us, to a place where a spring came up clean out of the rock. And it stood off while I drank, and I have thought since that a thing that did not care whether I lived would not have done that. Later that first day, it did a thing I've never told anyone because it sounds too much like a story. And this whole thing already sounds too much like a story, so I will just tell it. I had been sitting a long time, too spent to move, when it came back from somewhere out of my sight, and it set something down on the ground a little way from me and then withdrew to its distance, the way it always kept its distance, and waited. It was food. I do not know a better word for it. There was a handful of some kind of root, dug and knocked clean of dirt, and there were berries still on a broken bit of branch, and there was a strip of something I did not look at too closely. It had gone and gathered, and it had brought it back, and it had put it down for me and stepped away so that I could take it without having to come near. and it watched me while I ate the berries and the root and left the rest. And when I had eaten, it seemed satisfied in some way I could feel more than see, and it settled. I have thought since that this was the moment I stopped being something it was guarding and started being something it was caring for. And I do not know why it made that turn. And I have never decided whether it makes the whole thing more comforting or more frightening that it did. On the second night, something else was out there in the dark, something 4-footed and heavy. I heard it circling wide, and the Bigfoot changed. It had been still all evening, and now it stood, and it put itself between me and the sound, and it made a noise I had not heard it make. A low, hard sound that went out into the dark and was answered by silence and then by the 4-footed thing leaving. And I never saw what it was, a bear or a cougar, and I did not need to, because the Bigfoot had made the decision for both of us that whatever it was not getting past. On the morning of the third day, it did the thing that finally broke whatever was left of my idea that it was just an animal that happened to be near me. My arm had gone bad in the night, the long tear down it hot and swollen, and I was in a fog from it, and I was not being careful, and it noticed. I do not know how else to say it. It noticed the arm. It came nearer than it had come, slow, watching my face the whole time the way you watch, to see if you are frightening someone, and it took my wrist in one hand, and the hand was enormous, and could have closed and taken the arm off at the elbow, and instead it held my wrist, the way you would hold something you did not want to break. And it turned the arm to the gray light and looked at the tear, and then it let go and went off and came back with a wad of something green and cool. Moss or crushed leaf, I never knew what, and it put that against the wound and pressed my own other hand over it to hold it there and step back. I want to be clear about what that is. That is not instinct. That is not a thing an animal does to a member of another species it found in the woods. That is a mind looking at a hurt it did not cause, and deciding to do something about it, and choosing what, and understanding that it had to teach me to hold it because it could not hold it for me and keep its distance both. After that, I could not pretend anymore that I did not know what it was, and I mean that in every way, that I could not pretend it was only an animal, and that I could not pretend I was going to be able to walk back into my old life and not carry this. But here's the thing I have never been able to explain to myself, and it is the reason I am telling this at all. It did not treat every danger the same. The 4-footed thing in the dark, it faced down like a guardian, squarely, with a warning. But on the third day, when the danger was Trevor, it did something different. And the difference is the whole story. Because Trevor was still out there. I had let myself forget it in the ordeal of just staying alive, but he had not gone home. He was hunting me. And on the third afternoon, I heard him, far off but unmistakable, calling my name in that flat, calm voice, working the slopes below. And the sound of it did something to me that no cliff and no cold had done. It made me want to lie down and disappear into the ground. And the Bigfoot heard it too. And it did not stand square to it the way it had stood to the animal in the dark. It went low. It went still in a different way, a listening way, and then it did something that I still cannot get all the way around, which is that it moved me. It came closer to me than it had come the whole time, close enough that I could smell it, a deep, wet earth animal smell, and it put one hand, one huge gray-brown hand against my back, and it moved me, gently but with no room to argue, up and across the slope, away from the sound of him, into a stand of thick timber and rock where the ground broke up into folds you could disappear in, and it put me down in a fold behind a shelf of rock. And it crouched over me, and it went silent, and it kept its hand on me, and we stayed like that while Trevor's voice worked back and forth across the country below us, and slowly faded off in the wrong direction. there was a moment in that fold of rock that I have never gotten out from under. Trevor came close, closer than his voice had come the whole time. I heard his boots on the rock below us, the particular sound of a man moving slow and looking hard, and I heard him stop, not 30 feet down the slope from where we were pressed into the ground. And I heard him stand there for a long time listening, the way a hunter listens. And I knew that all he had to do was come up 10 more steps and around the shelf, and he would see us. And in that stretch of time, the Bigfoot did not move and did not breathe hard and did not make one sound. And its hand stayed flat against my back, heavy, still, and I understood that it was holding itself as silent as it was holding me. That a thing that size was making itself into nothing on that slope by an act of pure will for me, and that if Trevor came up those 10 steps, he was not going to find a frightened woman alone, he was going to find whatever this was standing over her. And that some part of the stillness was the Bigfoot deciding in advance what it would do if the man came the rest of the way. He did not come. He stood and he listened, and something in the wind or the country turned him. And after a while, I heard his boots move off downslope. And only when they had been gone a long time did the great weight over me ease, and I realized I had not been breathing either. It knew the difference. That is what I am trying to say. It knew that the animal in the dark was a danger to face down, and that the man calling my name was a danger to hide from. And it treated them differently, correctly, the way I would have if I had had any strength left. It understood that the man was the worst thing. It understood what Trevor was better than I had understood it in 3 years of loving him. And there was a moment in that fold of rock, with its hand on my back and its bulk over me and the voice of the man I had wronged searching the mountain for my body, when the fear went out of me all at once, and something else came in, and I turned into it the way you turn into anything that is keeping you alive. And I put my hand on its knee, and I leaned my head against its side, and it let me. It did not pull away. It closed the arm around my shoulder, and it held me the way you hold something that is shaking, and that is when I understood that I was not going to die on that mountain, and that the only creature in 100 miles that meant me no harm at all was the one that everyone would have called a monster. That was the moment. If there had been anyone there to take a picture, that is the picture they would have taken. And I have wished 1,000 times that no one had, because someone did. On the night of the 3rd day, after Trevor's voice had gone and we were still up in the broken ground where it had hidden me, something happened between us that I have never had the words for and still do not. The moon was up and I could see it better than I had been able to the whole time, the great tired shape of it sitting a little way off with its back against the rock, keeping its watch. And I was past exhaustion and into that clear, cold place on the other side of exhaustion, and I started to talk to it. I do not know why. I told it about Trevor. I told it what I had done, the whole thing, the affair and the lie, and the 3 weeks of calm I mistook for mercy, out loud, to a Bigfoot on a mountain in the dark, because there was no one else, and because I think I needed to say it to something before I died, and it was the only something there. And it listened. I know how that sounds. But it turned its head and it watched me while I talked the way a person watches you. And when I ran out of words and started to cry, it made a low sound. Not the warning sound and not the stopping sound, a different one. Quiet, almost under hearing. A sound I can only describe as the sound you make to a child who has woken from something. And it did not come closer and it did not touch me. It just made the sound low and steady until I stopped. I have never told anyone that part. It is the part I am most afraid of not being believed, and it is the part I am most sure of, and I have stopped trying to make those two things agree. His name was Hollis Bremer, and he was a tracker who guided in that country. and he had come up a drainage after a wounded elk, and instead he came around a shelf of rock and found a half-dead woman sitting against a Bigfoot with Bigfoot's arm around her. And he did the thing a man does when his whole understanding of the world breaks at once, which is that he lifted the camera he had around his neck and he took one photograph before his mind caught up with his hands. And the flash, or the movement, or just the arrival of a new man was enough. The Bigfoot was gone before the sound of the shutter finished, up and back into the timber without a crash, without a sound, the way it did everything. And it took its warmth with it, and it left me sitting there in the cold with a stranger staring at me and a photograph existing in the world that should not exist. Hollis Bremer got me out. He was decent about it, decent in a way I did not expect, and on the long walk out I told him some of it, the lost part, the injured part, and I did not tell him the Trevor part, not then, because I did not yet know what Trevor would say, and I was afraid. And that fear turned out to be the right instinct, because by the time I was in a hospital bed, Trevor had already told his version, and his version was that we had gone hiking and I had slipped above the gorge and he had searched and finally driven out for help, heartbroken, and everyone believed him because he was so calm and so sad. And because I had given him the story with my own confession, the affair, the guilt, a woman in a bad place, an accident in the mountains. His version and mine could not both be true, and the only thing that made mine even possible was a thing I could not say out loud without sounding like exactly the kind of woman who slips on a rock. Because who's going to believe that a Bigfoot hid you from your boyfriend for 4 days? So here's the bitter shape it all came to. I could not tell the true story of what Trevor did because the true story had a Bigfoot in it, and a story with a Bigfoot in it is not a story anyone acts on. And Trevor could not push his story too hard either because I was alive, and a live woman who fell to her death is a problem. And because somewhere in him, I have to believe, was the knowledge that I knew what he had done. So we fell into the same silence from opposite sides. He never faced anything for it. I never told it. The accident he planned did not happen, and the truth that would have hanged him never came out. And we were both, in the end, covered by the same impossible fact that the only witness to any of it was a creature that no court and no newspaper and no friend of mine would ever admit was real. We left each other alone. I moved. He moved. 28 years went by. And now he is dead, and the silence is only mine to keep now, and I have decided not to keep it. Hollis Bremer had the photograph. He found me years later to give me a copy, and to tell me he had never shown it to anyone and never would while I was alive if I did not want him to, and he was as good as his word. He is old now. He told me once that he had gone back up that drainage 12 times over the years and never seen anything again, and that he thought about it every day of his life, and that he had never been able to decide whether what he saw was the most frightening thing that ever happened to him or the most beautiful. And I told him I had the same problem, and that I had made a kind of peace with it being both. I have thought a great deal about why it helped me. I was not a good person that year. I had done a genuinely cruel thing to a man who trusted me, and I have never let myself off it. And the thing that saved me did not know any of that and would not have cared, and I have come to believe that is exactly the point. Every human judgment in that story, everything about who deserved what, ran through the affair, ran through what I had done, and Trevor used my guilt as the weapon and the alibi both, and the law and my own friends would have weighed me on it too. The only thing on that whole mountain that did not weigh me on it was the animal. It found a hurt creature in the cold, and it kept the cold and the dark and the 4-footed thing and the calm-voiced man away from her for 4 days. And it did not ask what she had done to end up there, and it did not need to. And when a stranger finally came, it gave her up and disappeared. and never once, in all of it, asked to be thanked or understood. I do not know if it is still out there. Hollis says the country has changed, that there are roads now where there were none. I do not know why it chose to help me, or whether choose is even the word for what it did. I do not know if it understood what Trevor was, or only understood that I was afraid of him, and that my fear of him was different from my fear of the dark, and acted on the difference. I have turned it over for 28 years, and I have not gotten to the bottom of it, and I have stopped trying. What I know is this: the worst thing I ever did brought the worst thing that ever happened to me, and in the middle of the worst thing that ever happened to me, I was shown a mercy I had not earned by the last thing on earth I would have expected it from. And I have spent the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person that mercy was wasted on, a little less. That is the whole of it. That is why I'm finally telling it, now that the man who tried to erase me is gone and cannot tell his version anymore. There is a photograph. There is an old tracker who will say he took it. And there is me, an old woman now, telling you that a Bigfoot held me on a mountain, while a man I had wronged hunted me through the dark and kept me alive and asked for nothing.
Real or fake, you decide. I was Alex, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.